Well, welcome, Alison, to the Recloseted Radio podcast. I'm so excited to have you. And to get started, I want to chat a little bit about what got you to where you are today. So, do you want to tell us why you decided to go into fashion design and pattern making?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Selina. This is so fun to get to chat with you on the podcast. So, yeah, I'm Alison Hoenes. I got into pattern making really because I loved sewing. I always sewed, like growing up. Me and my best friend, we'd have sleepovers, we'd make like doll clothes and stuff, listen to books on CD, and so that's really what started my interest in like fashion in general. I was not like a stylish person. It was more I enjoyed sewing. And then my high school and like college jobs were always working at theater costume shops. So again, it was like the sewing, being able to make clothing was really fun for me. So that's what I ended up majoring in college was fashion design, and really loved more of the technical side of things. So less of the what to make and more how to make it. I'm very like left brain, and so numbers are fun for me. And so pattern making is kind of a way to combine like my interest in sewing and fashion with more of that like number side that I enjoy. And so that's kind of how I got into pattern making. And then my first job out of college, like worked for a smaller brand, and so got to kind of work on fashion design as well as the pattern making, technical design, and textile design. So a little bit of like seeing the whole process. And again, really loved the pattern making the most and the technical side of things. So when I started my own business, that's kind of what I ended up doing, and it's an area where I enjoy, and a lot of designers who are creative or have kind of the business mind, they don't enjoy as much, so it worked out well. So we both get to kind of do what we enjoy the most.
I love it. And I want to talk today a lot about what you're an expert in, which is pattern making and design. But before we dive in, I know a lot of folks listening to this might want to start their own fashion line, but they may not have the fashion background that you have. And I feel like that prevents a lot of people from starting a fashion brand. And so I want to talk about this quote unquote myth. Just in your experience and in your opinion, do you think someone needs a fashion technical background to start a fashion brand?
Absolutely not. I mean, I think somebody on their team or that they're working with needs to have that experience or needs to learn it along the way. You know, you can learn it if you're interested in that and just don't have it yet. It can be a lot smoother and quicker process if you don't have that technical background to work with somebody who does. But yeah, the majority of the brands that I work with, the founders are not from the fashion industry at all. So they come into being a fashion business owner from, having a product idea that, maybe they've struggled with something in their wardrobe or know people who have, and so they want to solve this really specific problem. Or they're kind of on like the business end of things where they maybe have a finance or a marketing background and they got into this fashion business, but they aren't, sometimes they are the designer, but sometimes they're not even the designer. They're working with the designer to come up with the concepts, and then a technical designer and pattern maker to do the more numbers technical side of things. So yeah, you absolutely don't need to have that background already to start a fashion brand. Yeah, it's very common that founders don't. They're maybe bringing more of the business side, the creative vision, the kind of the CEO role to the business.
Amazing. So we're on the same page there. And given that, for folks listening that may not have a fashion background, I want this episode to be as helpful as possible for them. And so before we dive in, I want to make sure we're on the same page. So I would love your help in defining some common terms. And so, yeah, there's like the term fashion design, which I feel like is so general and broad. And so do you want to kind of talk about what that means and what that encompasses, first of all?
Sure. Yeah, so fashion design, it is very broad, but it really is the designing, coming up with the creative concept for a fashion product, whether that's apparel, whether that's accessories or shoes. Fashion is kind of all of that. Even jewelry, falls under fashion. So then, of course, there are kind of niches underneath that of, okay, are you an apparel designer? Are you designing, accessories for your pet? There's lots of things within that. But yeah, fashion design is kind of the big encompassing term for, coming up with those product ideas for a fashion product.
Okay, amazing. And then pattern making. Do you want to explain what that means?
Yeah, so pattern making is kind of like the blueprint or the engineering side of fashion. So the designer comes up with like they may sketch it out, they may have kind of reference photos or garments to communicate the concept that they want to create, and then the pattern maker then translates that into the shapes that are going to actually be cut from the fabric. So it's kind of engineering that, creating this three-dimensional product that's going to fit on a real person out of flat fabric. So what are those shapes in order to fit the person and create the designer's vision? So that's what a pattern maker does, and pattern making is creating that template that then the factory will cut from the fabric to create the product.
Cool. And then when it comes to the process, and we'll talk more about that later. So just in case someone's listening and it's like, I don't know what grading is or a tech pack is, whatever, that's fine. Allison will talk about it. But do you want to talk about what grading is as well and what a tech pack is?
Yeah, so grading is creating the other sizes of a pattern. So you create kind of what your base or your sample size is of that template. And then once that's approved and really meets the designer's vision, then that pattern is scaled up and down to create the other sizes that you want to offer for that product. And that's what grading is called, is grading those sizes. So a tech pack then it's kind of like the recipe for a garment or for a product, where it has the ingredients list, it has step-by-step instructions of how to put this product together. It also includes kind of quality control measurements. So for each size, for each of these points, what does it measure, so that the factory then has all the information that they need about what seams do you want, what finishes, what goes into it, what it should measure, where the labels go. It's really kind of your start to finish, all-encompassing like handbook on how to make this product. So that in theory, like the goal is that the designer, the brand can provide this tech pack and pattern to the factory, and the factory would have everything they need, all the instructions, all their questions answered in that one document.
And then product development. Do you want to talk about what that means?
Yeah, so that again is kind of a big encompassing term, but that kind of follows this whole process. So fashion design would be coming up with, okay, what do we want to create? And then product development is really taking that concept, that design, and seeing it through testing, tweaking, bringing it to life, and until it's to the point where it can then be produced as the final product. So it's that whole kind of process between coming up with the idea and getting the finished product. It is that middle piece of the how do we make this, how does it fit, and getting all of that together for the final production.
Okay, makes sense. And is there any other terms or definitions you feel like listeners should know about before we dive in?
I feel like you covered kind of the big ones there, kind of each of the process from design then through, I guess the only last one then is like production. That's where actually, the garment is actually made at it could be small scale, but could be larger scale as well. So that's kind of the last piece. You got the design, product development, which the grading, pattern making, and tech pack fall into that product development, and then production would come after that.
Okay, sounds good. And so I want to dive into the whole process now and piecing it together, which you kind of have done already. But for someone that's listening, if they have an idea to create a t-shirt, let's say, how do they go from this idea of a t-shirt to having the t-shirt in their hands? Like, what are the steps in between?
Yeah, great question. So the big thing that I always recommend brands start with is like, okay, you have this idea, is before you actually create the product, before you jump into that product development process, is who is this t-shirt for? So that's a huge piece. Like, are you making it for kids? Are you making it for men, women? And then even deeper than that, like, who is this customer? Why would they buy your t-shirt versus like the millions of other t-shirts that are already out there. So having a specific idea of who this customer is, why they're buying it, what their lifestyle looks like, what they care about in a t-shirt, that's super important because it's really hard to make decisions when it's kind of like infinite possibilities. And it's really hard to sell something if you don't know who it's for. Also, how do you make something fit when you don't know who you're fitting? So really understanding the customer and why and for who you're creating the product is really the first step in bringing that idea to life. So once you know all of that, it makes kind of the decisions throughout the rest of the process so much easier because you have this goal, you have this specific target that you're working towards. So after you understand who that customer is, then you would want to think about, okay, what fabric do I want to make this in? T-shirts can be, they're usually a knit fabric, which means it's stretchy. They're, often made of cotton, sometimes blended. So really thinking through, again, like, where's this going to be worn? How do you want, how easy or you want it to be cared for? Is this a t-shirt that's going to be worn for like more athletic, like wear to the gym type thing? Does it need any specific properties like quick drying or something? Or is this going to be worn kind of like more everyday? And is like breathability important or something for the climate or for the customer? And so those questions will kind of all guide then thinking through what material you want to make it in. And that's important because the fabric really determines a lot about the fit of and feel of the garment, as well as the look. Like different fabrics drape differently, they feel differently on the skin, and they stretch differently. So all of that is important kind of going into this product development process to understand kind of what we're working with. And so then at that point, once you know the customer and you have the design and you have an idea of the fabric, that's when you would work with somebody like me, a pattern maker, technical designer, to bring the product to life. So create a sample, create that pattern, test it on a fit model, have them wear it around, see how it works, make the tweaks necessary. And there's usually several iterations, like 2 or 3 samples, going through making some tweaks, making some changes to get that perfect fit that the designer is looking for. So after that is achieved in that sample, then the pattern is graded, all the other sizes are created like we were talking about, and the tech pack is finalized with all those measurements, all the details of, how deep is the hem, because that can even change the visuals and the feel of the garment. All those little details go into the tech pack, and then at that point, then the designer can work with a factory to produce the garment, either small scale, large scale, however many they want. They have the instructions and the fabric and the concept worked out and tested and ready to go. So that's kind of in a nutshell what this whole process from idea to product looks like.
Awesome. Thanks for taking us through that. That was really detailed and helpful. And so I want to dive into each of those pieces now and talk about some common mistakes you see folks make and how people listening can avoid them. So let's start maybe towards the beginning with pattern making. So what are some common mistakes you see here, or maybe even before pattern making as well?
Well, like I said, the not being sure about who this product is for is, I think, a big mistake, because there's so many things where, like, you can't, one size does not fit everybody. I'm a big believer in that. And so if you don't know who that specific, it doesn't have to be one individual, but like if you don't know who that specific like target customer is, then it's going to be hard to create a pattern that really fits them well. So kind of on the brand, or like as a designer, that's a big mistake that I see going into the pattern making process, is not having that clear idea of who this is for and how it fits into that target customer's life. And then in terms of like actual pattern making, I don't know if there's like other pattern makers or designers who are creating their own patterns listening to this, but a mistake I see kind of more on the craft of pattern making is not thinking of the garment and the pattern pieces in 3 dimensions, because you're looking at a flat template and it's a flat piece of fabric. And I think it's easy to forget sometimes that like this is going to be on a person that's very much round in 3 dimensions. Like there's almost nothing on a body that's flat. Visualizing how this area of the flat pattern is going to fit on a 3-dimensional body will yield a better fit and really, a better pattern too. So those are kind of, I guess, the 2 big things, both on the designer side or on more of the pattern making end of things that I see being common mistakes.
That makes sense. And also, as a side note, I just want to say I am not paying Alison to say this. I know that you both know that we are big fans of taking what I like to call like a customer first approach and really making sure you know who your target customer is. You figure out that there's a need before you go into it. And so, yeah, I'm not paying Alison to say this. We both believe in this, which is why we wanted to do this. And so, thank you for saying that, because I think sometimes it's helpful hearing someone else's perspectives on it and also thinking about it from a design perspective to realize just how important this is to have a strategy and be thoughtful and intentional before you go into this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really does help on both the technical side and just clarity of decision making through this whole process. Like when faced with multiple options, the customer and understanding of the customer really helps guide making that decision. So
Totally. And so moving along then in the process, when it comes to grading and making different sizes, I know that folks can face a slew of problems here. And so what are some common mistakes you see here and what can people do to avoid them?
So one thing about grading that maybe a designer without a technical background would not know, and then can have some problems with their grading with, is that the farther away, like grading works well when you go up and down a few sizes from that sample size. So, if you're sampling in a medium, you can easily go down small, extra small, maybe extra, extra small, and kind of up large, extra large, extra, extra large. Once you get beyond about 3 sizes-ish up or down, the math doesn't work quite as well for fit. So if you're doing a really large size range, like if you want to do extra extra small through like 6X, like a wide range of sizes, then it's best to fit in 2 different sizes. So then I would recommend like maybe fit in a medium and then fit in like a 2 or 3X, so that you can really see how those proportions and really dial in the proportions of that garment on 2 different sized bodies. And then you can create your sizes kind of like up and down from each of those so that you can get a better fit across that size range. So again, with like knowing your customer, if you don't know what size they are, it would be hard to determine, okay, which size should our sample size be? Who do we need to fit this on during the development process in order to make sure that we can accomplish a good fit across all the sizes that you want to offer. So that's an important thing with grading, is just knowing that the proportions do change with size, not just the measurements. Like you don't just add like an inch around all the edges per size. It's very, very different. Like the shoulders don't get that wide compared to like the chest or the hips. And so those ratios are different. And yeah, a good pattern maker will know that and can grade with that in mind. But fitting in, if you have a large size range, fitting in 2 sizes can really help get a better fit across that whole, and really make sure that the design stays consistent. Like visually, it looks like it's the same design, the same product across all the sizes to have that consistency.
Yeah, I was just going to say that makes sense. And for folks listening to this, because if they do have a bigger size range and they now have to do 2 patterns and they have to grade for more sizes, obviously that means it's a bigger investment. And so for folks that are just starting out and maybe just want to go from like extra small to extra large, do you think 1 pattern as a medium is kind of enough for now and then they can grow and scale from there?
Absolutely, yeah. So, and there aren't rules that like you can't grade like into plus sizes from your size medium pattern. Just know that the fit won't be quite as good at some point. Again, depending on the product. You know, like a t-shirt is fairly flat. There's not a lot of shaping. There's not really darts on a t-shirt. And so that type of a product is easier to add more sizes without kind of those diminishing returns. On the fit versus like a very structured like blazer or something where it has darts, it's really contoured to the body. That's where it's worth the investment to split. You know, maybe you start with just extra small through extra large, and you can absolutely do that with just one pattern. That's totally fine. And then maybe add the other sizes later once you've determined this is a good product for your market, there is demand for more sizes, then you can invest in a better fit for, you know, a more expanded size range. So you can absolutely do that. And it kind of goes hand in hand too of like the t-shirt where you can add more sizes and get a decent fit is a more affordable product to develop as well as a cheaper product to sell versus the higher end products that are more fitted. They are more expensive to develop, especially when you're doing those two patterns, but you're also selling them at a higher price point. So at some point, you know, consider that as well, that you're able to make more money selling a product. And yes, it's more expensive to develop, but you are selling it for a higher price than a simple t-shirt.
Yeah, that makes sense. And also, before we move forward, do you want to define what darts mean, just in case someone doesn't know?
So darts they're basically areas of the garment where like a pinch of fabric is taken out so that it can taper and kind of contour. So for women's wear, it's common to have a bust dart, so it'll extend from like the side seam towards the bust point on either side of the garment. Or maybe if it's a more fitted, like think of like a shirt dress or like a fitted bodice, it might have a dart that goes from the bust point kind of vertically down through the waist and down towards like the hip line. So that allows the flat piece, like cut one flat piece of fabric and then pinch out these areas to shape it and contour it for the waist, for your hip line, for the curve of your bust. That's what a dart is. It takes out the excess fabric there so that it is more shaped and like contoured to the body.
Awesome. Thanks for defining that. And so let's move along. We've talked about pattern making, grading, and then when it comes to putting it all together into the tech pack, what are some common mistakes you see there?
So the biggest thing with tech packs is there's no one like industry standard for what it looks like, what the format is, what's on each page, or even what's included in general. There are kind of like best practices. In general, a tech pack will include a cover page that has like the sketch of the garment, kind of key information like what's the style name, the season, the brand, all that kind of stuff. Then there's a bill of materials that's the recipe, like the ingredients list of everything that is needed to go into this garment, any buttons, labels, thread, fabrics, all of that. Then there's a construction section that will indicate to the factory how the garment is put together, what seams, what finishes, what the inside looks like, where the labels go, if there's any interfacing or like hidden structural details like between layers of the garment, as well as step-by-step instructions of how to sew it. So that's all in the construction section. And then it'll also include colorways. So if you're offering the garment in multiple colors, it should indicate, okay, what are the colors? If there's any contrast thread or something, that'll all be on there. Then sometimes, but not always, there's a cutter's muster pattern card included in the tech pack, which just it lists out all the pattern pieces and how many of each you need to cut, or any trims, like, okay, you've got a ribbon tie, how long is the ribbon? That would be on there. And then there's the graded spec. So that is the measurements for each size at each point. So like how wide is the shoulder? How wide is the bicep? How long is the garment? There's typically probably like 12 to 30 measurements for each garment that are on there, and then what those measurements are for every size that you're offering. So those are kind of like the big sections of a tech pack. Plus then at the end, there's pages for samples. So every time you get a sample, you measure it, you take some pictures at your fitting, you write down what you decided because you will forget why you made that decision. So putting all of that in a page at the end of the tech pack really helps you see kind of like the whole history of the development. So those are the big sections of a tech pack. And I think a mistake that I see is I'll receive from designers, they're like, oh, I already have a tech pack, and they'll give me a tech pack, but it really is just an illustration with a few call outs like, okay, functional buttons here, and then like 1-inch hem or self fabric sash that's removable. But it's not really telling me the technical details of how is this sewn together. What are the seam allowances? Like, it's missing some of those details. It has kind of, it's more of like a design spec at that point where they're maybe calling out, oh, I want, 8-inch front neck drop for my V-neck. Like, I want it to be 8 inches long, which is great and super helpful, but that's a starting point. We need more measurements than that and more details than that. Like, essentially, you should be able to give the tech pack to a factory or a seamstress. They should not have to ask you any questions about how it's sewn. They should be able to put it together without asking questions. Usually there's a few questions, but the goal is that they have all the details for everything that they need within the tech pack. And I see often that designers will start their tech pack, which is wonderful, and I'm all for that. It's like, start it, put down the information you have, put down the key details that you want to see in this garment, but know that that is just the starting point, and we need to flesh that out and add more information so that whoever is making the garment will make it consistently with the quality that you're expecting. So that's kind of the big thing I see with tech packs, is just a varying level of unfinished and not necessarily understanding that the level of detail that would need to go into it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I often say it's almost like your IKEA instruction manual for your product. Like, you want it to be as detailed as possible, and you want someone to essentially read this and be able to know how to make your product. So make it clear, be really communicative, but then also be as detailed as possible, to your point. And so don't just assume because like, you have a vision in your head, people are going to be able to understand it. So yes, completely agree here.
Like with an IKEA manual, is like a picture's worth 1,000 words too. So like, put it in words, but also show it in pictures and like sketches and diagrams, just like how one of those IKEA instruction packets are. Like, it shows you like, here are what the screws look like and how many are in this package and where they go. Like, that's exactly what, a tech pack would include. So, it's like, here's how many buttons, what they look like, what size they are, so you know where they go. All of that information. That's a great analogy.
Thanks. And so moving on towards the end, or the last kind of stages. So when it comes to product development, what are some mistakes you see here?
I mean, again, I think not understanding the purpose or the customer that this is for is a big thing. Sometimes I see a mistake being at some point, like, there's so many ideas that designers have, which is wonderful. It's like, we need those creative people with the vision, with the ideas. But sometimes I see designers like getting a little caught up in wanting to put all the ideas in one product, and it gets too overwhelming. It becomes muddied. It's better to like edit the ideas, pick the best ones, maybe save the other ones you want to do for a different product or a different like iteration. Maybe you do another variation later. But being really kind of like ruthless with the editing of the ideas. Simple is harder to do for that reason, but the best products are simple and make sense and are easy and feel effortless. And they feel effortless because there was a lot of effort that went into making them on the front end and designing them and really curating that product and its features. But during the product development process, if there's too many ideas, or you're not decisive enough about which idea you want to go with, it can really drag out that product development process, and you end up having to do sample after sample because you're just testing ideas versus testing one product. you're going through so much more, and so the timeline is drawn out, spending more money on having samples made. And so I think for product development process, like being really clear, being able to be decisive with your choices, and separate like yourself personally from the idea. Like it may feel like it's like your baby, and it, you know, absolutely does feel like that, but being able to stand back and like look objectively at it and make decisions and really edit where you need to, I think is a really key trait that I think designers sometimes get tripped up on. I think especially initially, where they get kind of too close to the idea and aren't able to edit and really focus the design.
That makes sense. And so, given all of this, for someone that's listening, they might feel a bit overwhelmed, but this is all helpful information to have in the back end. And then again, like Alison mentioned at the beginning, if you don't have a fashion technical background, that's completely fine. You can hire someone. And so if someone were to hire like a pattern maker, a grader, or someone to do their tech pack, what kind of questions do you think they should be asking to ensure it's a really good fit? And also at the same time, what are perhaps some red flags they should watch out for?
Good question. So, in terms of questions to ask, the biggest one is to ask about what the pattern maker, grader, technical designer, like what their area of specialty is. Because again, every kind of product category has its own unique requirements, own sizing, own kind of like fit in a way. And so somebody who's really used to doing kids wear maybe isn't the best fit for like your women's wear brand or vice versa. So I focus on only women's wear. So if somebody approaches me for kids or men or pet or like non-apparel, like home goods or something, I generally refer them to other pattern makers I know that have experience in those product types with the requirements. Like, for example, children's wear has lots of legal requirements you have to meet in order for, like, the safety for small children. That somebody who really specializes with that will be the most up-to-date on all those requirements and really kind of save you money and time in the end by knowing that. And so asking what the person specializes in will give you an idea of really what, you know, can they bring that technical knowledge? If the designer doesn't have that, if you don't have that, is this person able to bring all of the technical knowledge needed for this category of product? So that's really the biggest question to ask. Other good questions to ask are what services they provide. So like a pattern maker may also be able to make your tech back in your samples and grade, but not necessarily. They may just do one of those things. So asking what services they offer so that you know, do you want to work with multiple people and like product manage and like move it from one to the next, or do you want to work with one person who can kind of do that process start to finish with you? So that's a big question. As well as then like what will the deliverables be? Like what actually are you getting from working with them? And like what file format will you get, the editable files or just like the PDF that you can't update later? So those are all things, or even like who owns the rights to the work. Mostly it's like if you pay for it, then you as the brand and the designer own the work. But just clarifying things like that of like what will you receive is really important so that you're both on the same page about the value that you're getting and what you're paying for.
Quickly there on that note, for you, for your process, like typically do you have a contract you get clients to sign, or is it both ways, like you have a contract and then the client gives you a contract as well, or like what does that usually look like?
Yeah, so I have a contract that I use with my clients and include some of that, and as well as like confidentiality and payment terms and all of that. Rights to the work is included in my contract. So most of my clients, we use that contract. Some of like my bigger clients where they're like big well-known brands, they have their own contract that they want all their, you know, the freelancer contractors they work with to sign. And so I'll, you know, sign theirs usually in that case because they're just bigger and more established and they have their own. But with most smaller brands, like I have one that I provide, they can read it over and we work off of that contract.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks for explaining that, because I know someone listening might feel overwhelmed about that and be like, oh, I don't know if like, am I supposed to come up with that contract or what does that look like? So thanks for talking about that.
Yeah. I always, like when I send a proposal, I send that as well so that they have a chance to like read over it, ask any questions that they have, or, clarify any other of those details.
Great. And is there any other questions or red flags you think folks should consider?
Oh yeah, so red flags. I didn't speak to
Yeah.
those. Red flags. So I think one red flag, and I was talking to somebody yesterday about this actually, if the person you're considering working with is posting work they've done for other clients before it's launched, I feel like that is a little bit of like cause for to be wary. Not necessarily it's wrong, because again, it depends on what's in the contract they have with those brands. But in general, the kind of, and I'm not a legal expert, so don't don't take this as legal advice, but in general, kind of the accepted norm is that the product and the design and everything is confidential until it's publicly launched. So if it's like not been launched yet and somebody is like posting work in progress for a brand they're working with, and like that brand hasn't like tagged them or something where like the brand posted it first, I feel like that's a little bit of a red flag, because you some designers don't care and they're like fine with like a shout out publicly, but a lot of brands do want to keep certainly a pre-launched product confidential. And so I think that's important. It's important to me, and I know it is to a lot of designers, so I think that's one thing to look for. I think maybe another red flag would, I mean, just like in general with anybody you're working with, is like communication. If you feel like the communication is really lacking or hard to get a hold of the person, or they're not returning, answering your questions or timely way, I think that's just an indicator that it's not a good fit. They could be completely fine of a person, not like red flag necessarily in general, but that it's just a not great fit for you if the communication styles or like timeliness, responsiveness differs. So finding somebody that is aligned with your values and your working style, I think is also important. Just for like fun, like having fun in the project, you want it to work with somebody that you can get along with and have compatible like processes.
Yeah. And speaking of having fun in the process and making sure you're compatible, if you think back to perhaps some of your favorite projects or your quote unquote best clients, what did they do to make your life as easy as possible?
I really do like working with the founders who maybe don't have a background, like a technical background in fashion, but who are really clear on their business and their customer. So they're super focused on that, and that way we can create more of a partnership where like they bring that really strong point and they're like, you figure out the details, but like this is what I want, and they're very clear on what this is for and who this is. And so those are really the fun products for me, and projects is it's for a niche customer. We get to solve a problem. It's very clear. We get to work together as like partners on this, where I can really help bring their vision to life and like I understand their vision. So I can then kind of make recommendations to really best make that idea a real thing. I think those are my favorite types of projects and brands to work with are the specific customer, specific niche fit, unique idea, and then that kind of like partnership and communication there.
Cool. And is there anything else you think folks should know that you haven't been able to touch on yet when it comes to like the fashion design process or pattern making or product development or anything of that sort?
We covered a lot, I think. Yeah, it probably sounds more overwhelming of a process than it actually is. So I don't want people listening to be like, oh my gosh, this is a lot to do. It is a longer process that, you're not going to come up with an idea now. We're at the end of May and be able to launch it this summer. Like you are working. Generally, a first collection takes a year, sometimes two, if they're not working on it full time or a really technical product or something. But often like a year ahead or at least 6 months ahead is how far we're working. So I think that's important kind of planning wise to set expectations there, but then know that when you are working with somebody else on the technical side of this product development process, you don't have to know everything. Like You can ask questions, you can learn as you go if you're interested, or you can just say, you take care of the numbers and I want to worry about like the business side and the creative side. And so it doesn't have to be overwhelming. It is kind of like a slow, gradual, really intentional throughout the whole process to create this product with the best fit for the customer.
Totally. And so, like Allison's saying, it takes time, so that's okay. And also, like we've been saying throughout this entire episode, I'm always a big fan of people understanding the process and knowing the terms and the process, but at the end of the day, it's still someone else that's going to be doing it. So don't worry, we're not sitting here telling you to make the patterns or you to do the grading or you to make the tech pack. You can hire someone to do that. And so, yeah, hopefully this makes it less overwhelming for you, but you go into it with the knowledge you need to be successful. Yeah. And so, how can everyone stay in touch and support you?
Yeah, so the best way to stay in touch with me is on my email list, which you can sign up for on my website at howfittingpatterns.com. And yeah, I have a podcast called How Fitting as well. You can listen more, like hear what other founders are doing in terms of bringing their ideas to life and fitting their customer lifestyle and values in along the way. So that's the best way to get in touch with me, again, through that website. I've got a lot of resources on there for designers and brands, and yeah.
Awesome. And I'm going to be going on Allison's podcast shortly. So I'll link my episode if it's out. And then I'm really excited to go on. But I know Allison puts out a lot of great resources on her podcast. So make sure you check it out. We'll leave everything in the show notes. But thank you so much, Allison. This was so helpful. I'm sure people will get a lot out of it. And yeah, I'm really excited for folks to dive in and also listen to our episode.
Yeah, thank you so much, Selina, for inviting me. And yeah, this is fun to get to do podcast swap and be able to share more information and resources with each other's audience.